Everything that I was mourning was up here in my head. And that completely took me on a very dark spiral downward. I got very angry with God, especially.
Welcome to Intrinsically Motivated, where we're having conversations with experts in the field of addiction, recovery, and those who've been affected by it as we seek to mobilize the church to replace addiction and mental health challenges with flourishing. On today's episode, we're having a conversation with Uplift President Andy Clements, myself, and Matt Miller. Matt's going to share the lessons that he's learned during his time of struggling with addiction and then ultimately finding recovery, and how the church and his family were there with him throughout. I'm Tanner Clements, and I'm the Media and Training Director for Uplift Appalachia.
I would have been 17-ish, 16, when I came to Heritage. That would have been around that time. That would have been 2005-ish, 4.
So 2005, did y'all just move to Johnson City in 2005?
No, we used to go to Sinking Creek. I don't even know why we changed churches. I was just with the parents, and we just kind of went, and we all liked it. So I was like, oh, cool.
So you were there, got there in 2005. So I guess we'd been in Johnson City at that point 10 years or something like that. So what all were you involved in and stuff like that at the church at the time? Your family, you, that sort of thing?
When we first got to Heritage, I jumped right into the youth because everybody that was from Science Hill was kind of like around the same age, and they all seemed like, cool. And I loved the youth back at our old church. So I was very involved. And, going forward into college, as long as I was there, I wasn't in the youth group anymore, but I was getting involved with the kid stuff. That was a huge thing for me at the time, was doing the kid stuff. I loved getting on stage. I was a theater major in college, so getting on stage and doing that for the kids, that was always a lot of fun. So that's kind of, and I guess I sang a lot too. There was a lot of Sundays that me and Jessica Hurley sang a lot. But yeah.
Was that always something you were passionate about getting to do? Or
yeah, Mom always said I was singing before I was talking, and I see it evident in my daughter, because I've always questioned Mom, like, how'd you know I was singing before I was talking? I never thought about, she just hums, and she's been doing it since she was like 6 months old. I'm like, I get it now. I guess this is what she was talking about. So I've been singing my entire life. It was just something that always happened.
So growing up, did you grow up in the church? Were you in the church the whole time?
Yes, we were, but I think growing up, the family life was a lot different, and I think I learned a lot of bad habits, especially on a lot of Sundays going to the church, that not necessarily Heritage, and it has nothing to do with the church per se. It was a lot of family things that, there was a lot of Sundays where there would be a lot of arguing and bickering between the siblings and the parents, and everybody was just at each other's throats on the way to church. And as soon as we opened the car doors, everybody put on a happy face, and we were this perfect, great family, and that, I think that taught me a lot of the two life thing is kind of, I don't want to say that's where I learned it, but that might have been part of
it was easy to practice.
It was, because it was like, once you get out the door, you don't let anybody know what's going on, or that everybody's happy, or that I can't stand to be beside you right now, but I can't help it. I have to smile and be here.
Right. So was it while you were in, so obviously we're talking about your experience with addiction and recovery, that sort of thing. So how did you find yourself in that situation? Like, what's the best way to?
So I think it was of course, with everybody, it's a myriad of different things that lead up to it. I think a lot of it, I had a lot of freedom in high school. I never chose to experiment with any kind of drugs. I was in football, and I was in all these different programs and stuff, and we were always, drug tested. So I never even had the inkling. I didn't even drink in high school or anything like that, because I didn't want to. I had no desire to do those things. And I think when I got in college, I just wanted to experiment. And in the midst of experimenting, probably a little too heavily, but I wouldn't say any more than a lot of somebody with a head on my shoulders. It should have been a lot different. I should have known better. But a lot of kids party that much and don't have problems. My problems started, I don't want to say fairly quickly, but it didn't take a really long time before they started. I think what really happened was, I believe the first time I compromised my morals was when I had sex before marriage, back in like high school. That was the first time I compromised my morals. So when I got into college and I started doing those things, it was easier and easier to compromise my morals. Things that I knew were wrong internally. Like, I knew I shouldn't have been out drinking and stuff like that. I knew I shouldn't be smoking pot. I knew I shouldn't be doing all these things. I knew they were against the God that I believed in and everything I had taught my whole life, but I had this double life. It was like, well, maybe I can kind of hide this, or maybe I'm not this person in the light. I'm not this person when I go to church. So what's the difference? I guess was my justification at the time. But it really started me down a bad path where eventually I had a one-night stand, and the result of that I was told was pregnancy. And to Cliff Notes the version, I was lied to for about 5 months, thinking this girl was pregnant. Actually, I don't know if you guys recall, I like confessed it in front of the church with Reggie, and the girl was in the congregation when it happened. And like 2 or 3 weeks after that, I found out that the whole thing was a complete lie, and that it was a very hard thing to deal with mentally, because I had wrestled with the fact that this was happening out of wedlock. This wasn't even a girl I was dating. Like, it was just a terrible situation. At first I didn't want it, which was completely against everything I had. I had thoughts of like, maybe she'll have an abortion, and even she had said that she was going to, and then I was almost excited for that, and that tormented me inside to almost be excited for that. I think in the end, when she had finally said that she wasn't going to go through with the abortion, I was like, finally relieved. And then I came around, I was like, okay, I can be a parent to this dad. We're young, we don't have to be together, but I can be a dad. And then next minute I found out it was all fake. Like, it was never real. There was not like, oh, she lost it, oh, I can mourn something. Everything that I was mourning was up here in my head. And that completely took me on a very dark spiral downward. I got very, very angry with God, especially, more than anyone. And I'll never forget, 3 days after I found out the truth, I was trying to study for a biology exam. And I did the same thing I always do. I waited to the last minute and was trying to cram. And, I did the same thing I had done in the past so many times and aced all the tests. And I was sitting there doing my outlines and my memorization and all da. And I had worked on it for about 6 hours and retained zero information. Like, I couldn't focus. I couldn't remember anything. And I got so angry. It was like 2:00 in the morning. I walked outside. At the time, I lived on East Holston, I think, down near Broadway, and little houses, all of them right next to each other. And I walked out in the backyard, and I know I probably woke up every neighbor. I'm surprised I didn't get the cops calling me, but I was screaming at the top of my lungs. Why me? I called my mom and was like, why did this happen to me? What? Why? And I just screamed and cried for like 2 hours, but everybody left me alone. Thankfully. I had my mama on the phone. I had my dog. It was like, at that point in time, I kind of just threw my hands up at God, and I was like, you know what? I don't want you in my life anymore. That was when, for lack of a better term, all hell broke loose.
Right.
It was not fun for me in the least. I really thought I was figuring myself out and figuring things out, as an individual and as a free mind and all this stuff. And I was just so, I can't say I was lost, because I wasn't lost, but I was absolutely trying to run as far as I possibly could from everything that I knew and everything that had ever made sense to me.
I mean, one of the things that we tend to talk about is people doing things for reasons, not to absolve of, guilt or wrongdoing or anything like that. But it's like, there are steps that lead us to the places that we find ourselves at some point. I vaguely remember parts of that. I don't know how much of that you remember.
I remember some because your mom has retold me that, and she knows that was kind of a turning point, for lack of a better term. Just whether it was that thing as a thing, or that thing coupled with some of the familial things that had gone on early, whatever. I don't know, but it's
I think it all played a big part. And, like I said, I can't say there was one particular thing that really made it happen, or that this was the reason, or this was the cause. The whole baby situation was like the tipping point.
Right.
Like, that was what...
It was the straw.
Yeah, that was the straw.
The match in the powder keg.
Yeah, and it did explode, and it was just...
And that's why I say it's like, we use the phrase, people do things for reasons, because you had this whole experience. It led to this. I'm not saying that obviously that means that everything you did was great for you. Obviously, you're already saying that.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, you can see how buildup of things over time can really lead. And I think you're just saying that kind of It sounds more not so much like you gave up on believing it, but you were just so mad about the situation that you're like, I want to kind of defy everything just for the sake of. Or, I don't know.
No, I think I did. I really I knew, and it was almost like, you know what? Out of spite, I don't want to do what I know is right. But more than anything, I just needed to, like, I was dealing with the most excruciating emotional and a lot of times almost physical pain that I'd ever felt in my life. And I had no clue, nor was I capable of handling it at the age of like 22. Like I was absolutely not even nearly able to comprehend what that was going to do to my life.
I mean, you were essentially mourning the death of a loved one, and there were, like you said, there's no
That didn't exist.
Right. There was no opportunity for real closure with that, other
Yeah.
than the time that it would take to kind of.
And it took me about a decade probably to work through that. And, for a long time, it was just numbing it and ignoring it and just not even acting like it didn't happen. And that was probably the beginning of everything. But
So you're trying to numb what you were feeling?
Oh, absolutely. Because, I mean, that kind of pain, the only thing that can really bring any kind of healing in that kind of situation is God. There's no other way. There's no, I mean, your family can help, but until you really come to that point with God, you don't get over it. I couldn't get over it because I wasn't at a point to talk to him about it. Like I was just like, this didn't happen. You're not who I thought you were. Let's just act like neither one of us exists. Let's just do that kind of thing. And it was very lonely, I think. So a lot of it, I didn't know what else to do. I know I didn't want to die. I didn't want to kill myself. I wasn't suicidal, but I couldn't like function on a day-to-day basis with the noise and the everything going on internally. I just couldn't function without just completely shutting everything down.
So I guess to be more specific, what did that start to look like for you? How were you trying to numb?
So I
those
knew
feelings?
just from the the experimenting and everything when I was working at restaurants, I had already dabbled in painkillers and that kind of thing, and I kind of knew earlier on that those things don't only numb physical pain; they numb emotional pain too. So where I had taken them before, I was like, oh, maybe these will help. And that's, unfortunately, they did in all the wrong ways. And I absolutely, it was like I had to have them. And that actually kind of came before, honestly, that came when I found out she was pregnant. Honestly, is the first time I started using heavily. And like I remember that was the first time I'd ever experienced a withdrawal. And it scared me enough to where I was like, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then a couple months down the road is when I found out it was all a lie and everything. And I was like, well, hey, that worked back then. It's just when I stopped, it stopped working. I guess I don't stop.
And I know you said you felt alone at that point. How did that help did that help those feelings? Did that continue to perpetuate those feelings? What were your relationships like at that point with your family or with the church? I know you'd said you were still kind of connected to the church for a bit when you were kind of going through that. What was your relationship like with your family, with the church? What was your community like at that point?
I think that was a big sort of the problem because I wasn't really seeing it. I was seeing my family and talking to my family, but not nearly as much as I was. They can sense something's wrong, right? They're my family. So I don't want to see them if they can sense something's wrong because then they're busting my bubble. So I was just staying away from them. Church, same deal. They'd sense something's wrong, so I just stopped going. Pretty much. I mean, I would show up on the big days and when the families really wanted me to, but as far as like being engaged and being involved, I completely stopped. So my support system and my friends were all the people that I either used with, drank with, or worked with,
Were you living alone at that point, or
lived in the dorms? I lived with a good friend of mine that's still, we still keep in touch, and he was a good influence. He was a good friend. So I was living on campus, and then, towards the end, like when the baby thing happened, that's when I had moved off campus. And after that, I lived over near Science Hill for a bit, then ended up moving back into the house on mom's property, 10, 12 years ago, something like that, because I couldn't keep myself afloat anywhere else.
But were you still using at that point?
Yeah, all that from pretty much, all that time. I think it started, the heavy using started when I had moved off campus, but the partying and the lifestyle and all that leading up to that, I lived on campus and campus housing and all that kind of stuff. So I was slowly, getting more enriched with that worldly lifestyle and, let's all go get messed up and nobody cares and it's all okay.
Right.
It'll all be fine in 10 years when
I'm curious, did you find yourself, you said you were lonely. Did you find yourself being less lonely when you were using?
I didn't know I was lonely.
Okay.
Really, I don't think.
Yeah.
When you get high and you get, especially with opiates, it numbs you to where like you don't realize those things. Like, I mean, I could have been sitting completely up my room by myself, but I mean, I'm warm and happy, and even though I'm nodding out and probably look like a zombie, I'm happy because I don't feel anything. And it's when I come back off of it and I'm coming down that I start to get that lonely feeling again. So then I go,
Find some more.
and we've got
The cycle.
Were you by yourself a lot of times when you were using the heaviest, or were you with people that were also using it?
I preferred to. I was a selfish user. I didn't want to be around people because then you might ask me for some of mine, and I didn't want to do that. So that's honestly
It's a sensible.
That's me being completely honest about myself. I was very selfish. I didn't want. So to answer your question, I was usually alone because of that double life, right? Like I did absolutely everything I could do to keep anyone that I didn't want to know about me from knowing about me, whether that meant pushing you away or, trying to cover it up or, whatever the case may be.
Do you think you were successful with that?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, that everybody that knew you knew?
I mean, not necessarily. I think a lot of people couldn't put their finger on it. They didn't, like a lot of my classmates and stuff. Family members, they knew fairly well what was going on. Mom figured it out pretty quick. But a lot of my classmates and stuff, they knew something was going on. They didn't know because I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I couldn't talk about the whole Taylor thing. I couldn't watch TV. Man, I'd see a commercial with a kid walking down the street with their parents, and I'd lose it. It was like kind of like I had that almost like PTSD type thing for 10 years. So I didn't want to talk about it. So none of my friends really knew what was going on. I'd finally kind of like told Mom about it, and then Mom knew. She was a part of how I found out the truth. And then other than that, there was only like 3 or 4 other people that knew the truth. A lot of people were like in the church because, like I said, she had came to church that day. A lot of the people were like, "Oh, how's the?" And I was like, "Please don't ask."
How long did that kind of cycle continue? And was there a turning point where you started thinking, I need to try to break this cycle in some sort of, or was there something that kind of led you to that point?
I think you are at least for myself, I was constantly aware of the fact that this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. I really don't want to be this person forever. But I didn't have the willingness to do anything about it at the time. So it was cycles of, I'm getting in trouble, so to make you happy, I'm going to go to treatment. I need to clean up anyway. I need a oil change. That's what I used to call it. That's like I need a break from everything to get my tolerance down.
I know lots of people think that, but you just said it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's real.
It's a real thing. No, I'm honest about it. Like I recover out loud. I try to filter myself now these days a little bit, but I try to be honest about the way, my method of thinking, because I have to think about how I was in that situation. It's definitely not my problem solving manner these days, but I can look back on those times in my life and not just say, well, I was just out of my mind off drugs. I think about it and I'm like, well, I had a reason behind that. I was a stingy person, so I wanted to be alone. I wasn't just a recluse. Yep. I was a stingy person. I didn't want to use with you. I wanted to be, and those kind of with that.
Right.
It's I have to be honest with myself. If I can't be honest with myself, I don't know exactly why it happened and all those
But
things.
even that idea of like, I'm just recovering so that it'll be better for me.
Right.
When I go back to it in
even
the
getting
long
your
run.
tolerance down
So
makes
next
it
time,
cheaper, makes it better, makes it whatever. So
and that's
it's like,
kind of what I was
and
thinking.
I'm
Gets them off my back.
right.
Gets the legal problems over for a little bit. But it wasn't until when Neelan, after we got married, when I had my son, is when I was like, man, I wanted to do something about it, but I white knuckled like for so long, and I just tried to be like, well, it can just be this just little minute factor in my life, and that's all it can be. And the problem is that little minute factor that you think it is ends up controlling everything else. You know what I mean? Like, no, I know, like Neelan never went without. I always tried to pride myself back in my using days that, my son never goes without food. He never goes without clothes. No, he didn't, but he didn't have everything. He had everything he needed, but he didn't have everything he could have had, I guess is like how to put it. He had his basic needs met, and I loved him, played with him. He didn't grow up in abusive or anything like that, but I could have been a lot better. And that's a huge regret that I do have, but the blessing is that I have an amazing son, and somehow everything is just amazing, and the kid is.
You mentioned
perfect.
him, but I think we need to establish you got married in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, well, listen, my wife. I think
there's a little bit of a, there's a connecting point that I want to make in
Yeah,
there.
there's a gap. So
how did we get to you having a kid and all that?
I got married before. I like to say I got married before I was 30. But it was like 3 days before I turned 30. I met my wife in the middle of all this stuff. And, that's another interesting story that I would rather us both share. Her side of a lot of things and what carried us through our relationship. But yes, we met in the bar life. We met, in that lifestyle. And we both lived through a lot of things. She was not she didn't use drugs, but we partied and all that kind of stuff. So we had met that way and ended up, getting married. A lot of times I can explain to you the whole thing, but we'd be here till next Tuesday. But it was God working the whole time. I used to like to think that I settled, but I think God knew exactly what I needed in my wife. And it took me up until recently, up until not very long ago, to figure that out. And that she compliments me so well. I love what we have now. And it's a big part of my life, and it's a big part of the way I carry myself these days. But when we first met, man, we were a wreck. And, we're going through these first few years of marriage, and within the first, few months of being married, less than 6 months, she's pregnant, and we're having our first child. It's my son, and he is the most glorious thing. Neelan David, it's my little buddy. He's a great kid. He was what made me realize my self-worth. I didn't feel like I was worthy of anything. I had gone through so much crap, and I was such a just piece of junk and lived in such a dark side of life for so long that I felt unredeemable type thing. But then, you see the love of a son and how much that unconditional, and I think it showed me that love of God again. You know what I mean? And I hadn't felt that kind of love even from the wife. I know she probably felt that way. I didn't let it myself be loved in that manner, but I let down all guards with my son. And that started breaking down a lot of walls, I think. So piece by piece over his, first 3 or 4 years, I think I was like, I need to do something now.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking through kind of like what you said was kind of that straw that broke the camel's back originally was kind of that fear of loss, and then kind of seeing that paid full circle in him is kind of a cool way of seeing that.
I haven't really thought about that, but that is.
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking like,
no, it is cool.
You went from.
I'm kind of sad that I haven't.
I've lost this thing. I'm just putting words in your mouth for future use.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I'll use that next time.
But I mean, it's just like I just kind of see that. That's a cool balancing point in your life. But even at that point, like you said, you were still holding on to that little piece.
I wouldn't let go.
That you wouldn't let go of.
I needed a nudge.
So I'm curious about, because at some point in there, it had to be unmanageable. And I'm going to remind you something that we may or may not keep this in here, but I saw you at Walmart one day. Hadn't seen you in forever.
Oh, please.
Saw you back at the meat counter, and we just chatted for a minute and went on. And that evening, your mom told me you got caught shoplifting at Walmart. Yeah. And so I saw you during your collection of things at Walmart that you then got arrested for.
that was on Thanksgiving, probably.
I don't know. I just remember it was like within a 24-hour span. And it's like, if you are being caught shoplifting at Walmart, something is unmanageable at that
Oh
point.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Everything was unmanageable. Don't get me wrong. I was a complete wreck in a lot of ways. I kept it together somehow, and I didn't keep it together. I think God kept it together for me in a lot of ways. When I go back and look at a lot of those years and a lot of the things that I thought were, oh, I just have terrible luck, like getting arrested shoplifting, or the cars that I've wrecked. Oh my gosh, the cars that I've wrecked, and the times that I walked away unscathed. And when I look at it now, I'm like 6 inches to the left, and I'd have died. But at that point, I was like, oh, I wrecked my car. I've got to be the most unlucky person in the world. And now when I look back at it, I'm like, man, that was God not allowing me to go too far. He was protecting me. I've said this over and over again to so many different people. He protected me when I was not capable or able or willing to protect myself. And that was the only thing that got me through, unbeknownst to me at the time. I thought I was like, curse you, leave me alone. It was kind of like how I felt. But thank God he didn't leave me alone.
So you're kind of trying to manage things. What was kind of and I think I know,
Probably.
but what was the breaking point for you that really opened your eyes to realize, no, it's actually time for this thing?
The threat of a third offense DUI and 6 months in jail will kind of, for me, that was the okay. Well, yeah, I can't do 6 months away from my son. It's kind of like I was like, I don't care what I have to do at this point. I'm done with this. And I really, it was the first time that I had ever committed to go into treatment without the preconceived notion that this is not the last time I'm going to get high. Like, I had always went to treatment before thinking oil change, This time I was like, this is not oil change. This is new car. It was really hard to make that commitment to going to Nashville was not a hard commitment to make. That was really cool to go into that. But while I was in Nashville, I felt, now I can say convicted. At the time, I just felt like it was the smartest thing to do. I went into further treatment. I was like, I need 3 weeks. Is not, that's I don't care who you are. That's not enough time. I don't care. I don't agree with anybody that's like, oh, I can go to treatment for a couple weeks. And you need more time. And for me, that time was like 6 months. And that buckling down and showing some willingness to humble up a little bit. I never was willing to do that. I always wanted to just jump back to my life as quick as I could. But to move into a house with like 14 other dudes and commit to curfew at 9:00, every time you walk in the door, you get a breathalyzer, drug test twice a week. We got to be at clinical every day. After that, you're getting a job. It was all these things that I was like, okay, this is what I got to do. And I am immensely grateful that that's how it worked for me, that's what I did. And that's where I went after going to treatment. So
I have 2 questions that kind of follow up on that. So it was third offense DUI was going to lead to, you said 6 months? Mm-hmm. And your recovery program that you ended up in
I was there for 6 months.
Was there for 6 months. How was that? How at that point in your self did that feel like a good thing versus, because both of them, you're away from people, you're in a different kind of, how was that? How did that feel different than why was that more appealing to you than I'll just do the 6 months and I can continue with, what was it that was really?
Well, there's no treatment in jail. You're not getting any of the, there are programs, there are things that you can do, but for the most part, when you're in there with all those other people, like all you can do is kind of fall into that like-minded individual of all these other people. It's not necessarily like you're going to go with the flow and do what they do, but if you don't kind of follow their pattern, you stick out, and like it's hard. It'd be hard to do in jail. And I didn't go into treatment knowing it was going to be 6 months. It just kind of worked out that way. And I didn't end up having to go back to court for the DUI and all this stuff until after I'd been in the program for 6 months. And then it turned out that, I was thinking when I got there, I was still going to be looking at, I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, I was like, I've been in treatment for 6 months, but who knows? I was hoping they'd be like, day for day, you're good to go, you know, and they'd just be like, whatever. You did a good job. Keep it up. That's what I hoped for. That was not the case. I could not have fathomed what God had done with this. You know, I'm looking at third offense, and I'm thinking it's 6 months easy. You're looking at, you know, losing your license for 6 years, like all this. And I had other charges too. I was looking at 225 days actually. So it was almost a year. So I was like, oh my gosh. And I go in there after I'd completed treatment and everything, and I was nervous and I had no idea what was going to go, but I did have a comfort about me. I was like, this is going to go exactly how it's supposed to go. I was nervous, but I had a peace about it. And from the time I walked in that door, there was not a single mention of a third offense DUI. They were talking about second offense. And I still to this day don't know why that happened, other than God himself. I really don't, because there was, I could show you paperwork where it was multiple, and they were like, you're looking at this much time. And then when I got there the last time, they were like, second offense, this and that, 2 years, blah, blah, blah. I was like, yes, where do you need me to sign? Can I, let me get that before you realize what
This
you've
all
done.
sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other question I kind of had around all of that was, because I know at some point you ended up back being connected with the church, and the church helps. Was that the time that the church was really helping support getting you into that treatment program? Or was this a different?
That was, they had already gotten me there. They had paid for like the deposit and a lot of like the childcare stuff while I was in treatment. So I went through all that treatment and stuff before all the jail time and all that. And then, the church had supported me from a distance with that.
I was going to say, I was just curious how that relationship kind of came back together and how that church support kind of got you where you were.
I guess, you know, before when we were just kind of talking, I was mentioning how I think with everyone in addiction, it's as complicated as someone's DNA as to how they got to that point, and the intricacies of what they went through and what they experienced while they were in addiction is like, it's so unique to everybody that there's not just, here's a handbook of how we should follow this and that. You know, in the very beginning, even still, I didn't really want to hear a whole lot about God. So for me, I've kind of realized that a lot of people that come to addiction, what they need is God. Like that is the only thing that can really, you know, kind of bring them back. But it is so hard for them to accept that concept or that kind of love at that point in time. So I think I've always kind of believed that you have to save the addict's body before you can save their soul. So it's like you kind of got to get them into treatment. You kind of just got to support them. That's what happened to me. I was just kind of supported, but I didn't have anything shoved at me. I kind of went my own route. I did a lot of NA early on. You know, I was in treatment, going to clinicals every day. So I was very immersed in like recovery life constantly for 6 months. But I didn't have a church body or anything back in Knoxville where I did 90% of the treatment. Yeah, I did do a lot of stuff with NA, and it did help me very a lot in the beginning, because I think it introduced you to that spiritual connection again, and that's what I was missing, was that spiritual connection. And I thought I was going to go back to Knoxville, back to that life after the jail time and everything, but being home and being with my family again, being with my son constantly. I got to see my son and I got to talk to him every single night. You know, you'd ask what was the difference of going to jail, going to that. I was able to talk to my son and see my son. That was the biggest difference. So being that I was still very involved, still seeing him quite frequently, talking to him every night, when I came home and I got to be with him again, that was just, I was like, well, I'm not going back to Knoxville. I'm going to come home. And, you know, when I came home, I didn't have my body of my fellowship of friends and support people like I do in Knoxville. Now, I still go to Knoxville just to go see my fellowship people down there. And when I got back involved with church here, it was just, I mean, it felt like coming home again. Like, I knew a lot of people knew me and still, you know, had heard maybe a little bit about me or whatnot, but I knew that God was in that place, and I knew that's where I needed to be. I didn't know what facet or how that was going to look. I just knew through everything that I went through in Knoxville and gradually through going through the fellowship and learning a lot of things about myself through like the 12 steps and a lot of things, I was like, this is God. I don't have to It's not God as I understand him. It's God. I don't have to pose that question. I know what it is, who it is, and had known the whole time. So that was very easy for me. Like it wasn't a lot of, and that's kind of what I get at when I say you got to save the body before the soul. A lot of people have no concept of God that come into addiction. That's why they do the God as you understand them thing. That's a very inviting thing to say, like, here's your chance to meet something spiritual, and it's your choice what that is. You kind of got to save the body before you save the soul. In a lot of ways, that gives people some freedom to kind of not focus on religion and get better health-wise. And then for me, like I said, I already knew, but it connected me to it again, to God again, without me even realizing it. And before, I was like, oh, well, I know what this is. I've felt this before.
So what was it? How did the church make you feel so comfortable to come back in? Or what was it that kept you there after you started reconnecting again?
For me personally, I experience God through music. And it's not necessarily any one person or any one song or any one situation. There were just some Sundays that I would be coming and just kind of hanging, and I would just get emotional. And it was, but not like a sad, like, oh my God, I feel guilty. Like it wasn't like, it was just like oh my gosh, I have missed this. So feeling that again and feeling a lot of the stuff that I had been going through in Knoxville when I was doing a lot of the step work, I was like, you know what? I need to get involved. I need to start doing some stuff. So I just up and I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to Puerto Rico last year. And that was like such a cool experience. And bringing kneeling on Wednesday nights and stuff to church, like I've just tried to insert myself in a lot of places. And it's been, nobody in any facet has been like, oh, no, we need to, let me hear about your story first. Everybody has been so welcoming and so curious in a lot of ways. They're like, oh, I want to know. Like when we were in Puerto Rico, everybody's like, we want to hear your story. We want to hear your story. Like so bad. And it's something special to be able to tell a story that went as deep and that didn't go as badly as it could have. I by the grace of God, made it out alive. And I get to tell that story. And that's a true blessing to me these days, that it's not something that I ever regret that I went through. It was awful. It was terrible. It was the worst time of my life. The decisions were so poor, but it created this different understanding of who I am and who God is for me. And that has really changed my life in a lot of ways that I didn't see happening a year ago. Even with a year clean, didn't see it happening.
Right. And that Puerto Rico trip was a construction trip, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It's in relief. So we did do a lot of that kind of stuff, and man, it was awesome to go down there.
Because that's what you're doing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
I do construction work.
So when did you get back in? So I know your dad runs a construction company.
Yeah, I work.
And so you got in helping him.
Yeah, I had been working. I worked for him for 12 years or so before, and I swore to myself going through treatment that I'd never go back to it, but with the jail time that I had to do, I was given the opportunity to be able to do work release. Being that I lived in Knoxville, I couldn't drive I had to come do it in Sullivan County. So I couldn't drive from Sullivan County to Knoxville every day to go to work. So I had to find a job here. Hey, Dad. Hey, you know how, you wanted me to come back to work? I guess I'm going to come back to work. And I swore it was going to only be for the 7 weeks that I had to do the jail time. And then the 7 weeks went by. And again, I have come to find in basically every situation I've gone through of any importance in recovery, if I just stand back and don't make the decision, God will kind of make the decision for me. So like, I didn't want to come back home until I saw my son. I didn't want to come back to work for my dad until I started doing it again. And I was like, oh, well, I'm this different person now. It's not that I couldn't handle him. I was just so messed up in the head that I couldn't handle I wasn't a good employee anywhere. I couldn't have been a good employee anywhere. So he just dealt with me at the time, I guess. And now I've noticed that I have a lot more patience and I do a lot better job. I was the problem. It wasn't him. So that was, that was a lot of the things I learned about my marriage too. A lot of the things that I didn't like about how my marriage was going before I had went to treatment. And then, even like while I was in treatment, I learned that a lot of the things that were lacking are things that I wasn't bringing to the table. I realized that when I started trying to do that a little more, and then she followed suit, and then we're giving this back and forth, and I'm like, wow, this is how this works. Oh my gosh. And I was talking to Mom about it, and she was like, well, you never did have a very good example of what it is. You just had a good example of what not. And I was like, well, okay.
I guess, so now you're obviously not afraid to talk about this stuff.
Not at all.
You obviously have learned a lot about yourself. You've learned a lot about the church. You've learned a lot about God. You've learned a lot about all of those things. So when you get the opportunity to talk about it, when people are like, we just want to hear your story, what are the things that you're most hopeful that people will hear? And maybe like if they're only going to hold on to one or two things when they hear your story, what are the things that you're most excited for people to maybe learn when you get to share kind of all the things that you've been through?
A lot of the times when you share your story, a lot of people talk about experience, strength, and hope. So a lot of times you kind of want to focus on those things. It's not necessarily a program. It's not like I've got these 3 things I always talk about, but I try to keep those things in mind. So I always like to point out the hope that I have today. You know, a lot of people still struggle. There's so many people that just can't seem to even once they're in recovery and have been in recovery for years, they struggle so hard, and life is a struggle. You know, it's never easy. It's never something that is rainbows and puppy dogs and whatnot, but there is hope. And the hope that I find today is hope in God. And I like to put that in my story so they get to see that's how I feel. But I don't like to make that the focus, because that a lot of people turns them off, right, real quick. So I throw a lot of hope in there about my life these days and how my relationships are healing, how I've got a lot of support, and how not necessarily it's because it's the church and all these things. I have all these relationships these days that are meaningful relationships, because I can carry on a conversation without nodding off, and I can be a productive member of society and not go to Walmart and steal things these days. I can just go buy them because I can afford them. It's the things I was missing in the past. So there's the hope aspect of it, the experience. All I can do is tell how things worked for me and how God worked in my life. And I am never shy from the fact that it was God that did it. I don't leave that part out, because that's my story. That's my part of how things went for me. That's my experience. So that's where I really put a lot of the God in. Now, the strength, a lot of that comes from the support and a lot of the people that you put in your life. You know, they always say stick with the winners. I tried to do that a lot. So when I'm sharing my story, those are the kinds of things I really want people to be able to see. And, you know, you can't just go up there and talk about, I've shared my story several times over the past couple of years, and you can't just go up there and put a sad face on and like, these, recoveries. And it was all these terrible days. And it was a lot of bad. And there was a lot of terrible things that happened, but there have been a lot of good things that have came from those experiences in my life. I get to relate with people that not a whole lot of people can relate with. I get to say, we went through the same thing, man. For instance, when I was in Nashville, I don't know if it made a difference to the guy. I really hope it did. And I don't know why I did it. But while we were pulling in a gas station to get gas right after we left the hotel when we were kind of leaving town, saw a homeless guy sitting out there. I don't give people money, ever. That's not something I do. Because, like, I'll take you buy you some food. I'll take you, but I don't, because I've seen that life. I know a lot of times that's, people can tell you that all day. So I usually don't go that route. But for some reason, I felt led to kind of give this guy a couple dollars. Nothing serious. I just gave him like $5 or whatever. But when I talked to him, I was like, hey, man, I don't know if this is what you're struggling with, but I was, I'm not shy of the fact that it was like I was a needle junkie. I did heroin for, 10 years and da-da-da-da. And a lot of people, they kind of get, whoa, really? Type thing. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm serious. I'm telling you, like I'm not joking. But I found a different way to live. And I kind of tell them about NA, some resources, and ask them if I could pray for him. And after I walked away, I got back in the car and I was like, I don't know why I just did that. I really don't. I looked at Brooke and I was like, I'm not sure why I felt led to do that, but I did it. I don't know if it made a difference in that man's life, but that's how I live these days. Cause like, I don't know whose life it might affect, but there were times and there were things that people did to go out of their way to help me. And all I can do is try to do those things in return. That gives me a little bit of the same experience hope, and joy, and strength.
That's awesome.
I have a question because
Sure.
you mentioned, so what we're trying to do is equip churches to walk with people, and one of the things you said was the trip was so awesome. People didn't run away from you. They said, I want to hear your story. Do you think that is something universal, like that most people, it would be okay for church folks to be curious about them? Or do you think you're unique in that?
I wouldn't say I'm unique in it, but I'd say, it kind of goes along the same path as everybody's
Right.
different in that.
DNA.
a lot of people are, introverts. They would be like, I was already kind of familiar. I knew who Joel Miller was. Like I knew a few people that were already there. So it wasn't like a brand new thing. I think really the best thing that people can do to start with is just say, look, I love you. I care about you.
Right.
Whatever, that's more than anything, and not pressing that God thing. Just I'll pray for you. That's and not make it a big. Please help this person. Just
Right.
I don't.
And you don't want to be a circus animal.
Right, right.
Ooh, I've never met a junkie. Will you tell me
let's
about
not
it?
be tell me how it is to do drugs. But sometimes with some cases, maybe that's what could happen or this person might want. It's so unique in how one person can differ from the other and what can really make a difference in an individual's life. For some people, it could be that meal or that hug or that phone call or just somebody telling them, I love you.
Right. So kind of the love and being curious or willing, but not.
I guess it's not like let's not like questionnaire it, but
Right.
if you develop a relationship with somebody and they feel comfortable to where it gets to a topic, I wouldn't go fishing for like, oh, what do you get high on Thursday night? Did you do some meth or I'd probably keep it to like, what are you struggling with? What can I pray for you about?
Yeah. Okay.
Type thing. I really think you can go individually and kind of realize, like, I try to find a meter of where that person is. Like, are they over here on complete, like, negative numbers spiritually? Like, are they, like, so mad like I was for a long time that they need to even just come back to zero? Or are they, like, somewhere on the spectrum where they might be okay with a little bit of it? Some people are like, can I pray for you? Some people are going to be like, no, don't. I didn't want to be prayed for back then.
I mean, it sounds a lot like you have to put in the time to actually get to know people.
It is.
And like really build relationships with people.
It is, and I think that's more the important thing. That's kind of what I mean about saving the body before you can save the soul. People that don't feel loved and don't feel that acceptance aren't even going to understand the concept of God until they understand that they see Jesus in somebody else. And they might not even know that's what they're seeing yet, but they'll realize that later. I believe in recovering out loud. I know there's a lot of stigma that comes with people in addiction. That's starting to, I really feel like that's starting to ease up a little bit these days. And a lot of people are becoming more aware and seeing that it's not just, the guys that are under the bridge. It's, the guy that handed you groceries yesterday. It's your lawyer. It's, the doctor that had surgery or that did surgery on your, nephew last week. It could be anybody that has a problem with gambling, alcohol, drugs, sex, anything. It can be any one of us. So I think that stigma is starting to go away. The more people are open about it, and the more it becomes such not such a negative, oh my gosh, topic.
And hopefully that means that we can be less scared to build relationships with anybody.
Absolutely.
And that sort of thing.
And I think in turn that will lead to a lot of people, the walls coming down and feeling more open to talk about it. Like, oh, people aren't just going to look at me and think I'm this junkie
right
now.
But that takes time. And it takes,
yeah.
It's going to be hard.
Being seen as a person takes a little bit of time.
Next time on Intrinsically Motivated.
What I'd like to project to the community here is that I believe we physicians have taken away the autonomy of patients who are pregnant with opioid use disorder.
Intrinsically Motivated is an Uplift Appalachia podcast. Uplift Appalachia seeks to replace addiction and mental health challenges with flourishing, and we believe that an intrinsically motivated church is the answer. To learn more, visit upliftappalachia.org.